Coming up in today's newscast, Jerusalem welcomes a new embassy while clashes along the Gaza border take a sharp turn. The mayor of Dublin calls for a boycott of next year's Eurovision competition, and get ready to see space like you've never seen it before, thanks to incredible Israeli technology.
Yesterday, history was made. With the opening of the United States Embassy in Jerusalem comes a new era for Israelis, one that has them celebrating just how far their country has come. Though the move itself may be mostly symbolic, it's a gesture that's been felt all over the Jewish state.
For many Americans, the official recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital is a formality that reflects a long-held truth.
From King David's time to our own, President Trump has now etched his name into the ineffaceable story of Jerusalem. And as the president said just this morning, today is nothing less than a great day for Israel.
As for Israelis, Trump's decision to unilaterally recognize the city as their capital changes little on the ground. For decades, Jerusalem has already been home to the government and is the most populated city in the state of Israel. Not everyone is taking things so well, however. At least 100 Jewish American protesters rallied in Washington, D.C., criticizing the new embassy move. For them, the decision ends Palestinian dreams for the state of their own and ignites a promise of even more bloodshed to come.
You know, I would ask Jared Kushner how the Israeli military killing 40 Palestinian protesters today in Gaza helps build peace. I would ask him how the dispossession and demolition of Palestinian homes in East Jerusalem brings peace. And how he sees the U.S. allying with the most far-right elements in Israel, how that's going to help bring peace, because we know that peace will only come with peace.
Jared Kushner touched upon this issue, though, during his address at the embassy yesterday. For Trump's son-in-law, who was once his closest advisor, those unhappy with the decision are merely part of the problem.
As we have seen from the protests of the last month and even today, those provoking violence are part of the problem and not part of the solution.
Amidst the celebration of the United States Embassy move comes the gruesome finale to the Hamas-sponsored March of Return protest. Yesterday, as Americans and Israelis feted the opening of the embassy, some 40,000 Palestinians amassed on the Gaza border, and things quickly spiraled into violence. At this time, at least 58 Palestinians are believed to have been killed in these latest clashes, bloodshed that is unfortunately expected to continue today. LTV's Brett Allen Smith is now with us. Brett, what's the security situation now?
Well, right now it's still a little bit early, but at this time we're seeing those rallies resuming along the Gaza border, though in significantly fewer numbers compared to yesterday, only about a couple hundred today, I would say. But today isn't just about protests and the embassy move. Today it actually marks the Nakba, the catastrophe day, as the Palestinians call it, which commemorates the day that Palestinians were expelled from their land in Israel's own 1948 independence war. And obviously this time is exactly what Hamas had in mind, of course, when they scheduled these protests in the first place. Things were designed to hit, a fever pitch yesterday in parallel with the embassy opening. This evening also happens to be the start of the Muslim Ramadan holiday, which is why, in addition to Gaza, we're actually seeing major protests forming in, the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and even here in Arab-Israeli communities as well in Israel.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit now about the violence that we're seeing for a second, though, because as of now, the Gaza Health Ministry says 58 Palestinians were killed in yesterday's clashes. The IDF, of course, is saying that Hamas has willingly put these people in harm's way, probably to stage this, this PR war that we're seeing. Sure. I mean, we've even seen, fake reports of guys running behind, guys with kids who look wounded but aren't. But still, people are still accusing Israel of using too much lethal force. So is that much force warranted in this case?
Look, obviously we can't, underplay the loss of human life here, and there's obviously a lot of unrest and tension going on. In the last 6 weeks for these protests, we've seen something like 112 Palestinians killed in those clashes, and this includes, 2 journalists, several minors, and possibly even an infant baby yesterday. Now, at the same time, let's be very clear about something. Nothing in the Middle East is ever as cut and dry as it appears. Hamas is known to pay protesters to approach or even breach that security fence, and that's something that they know will put those people in harm's way. And for the ordinary Gaza citizen, that's enough money to change, their family's life, let's say. So that's a very disturbing set of options. Let's put it that way.
Well, I mean, and not only that, but Hamas is sponsored by Iran specifically for stuff like this, carrying out terror and sowing unrest targeted right at Israel.
Sure, but I think that where things get murky is that some Palestinians do feel that they do have a legitimate reason to feel, betrayed by the embassy move. Most feel like they tried negotiations in the past, and the Palestinians were actually kind of hopeful that President Trump would give them a serious peace deal that they would really consider. But for most Palestinians that we talked to anyway, that optimism vanished the moment that Trump moved the embassy, because it essentially seemed to them like America had picked a side and could no longer be impartial. So while Hamas may be clearly manipulating that feeling, that anger, we're also seeing tons of nonviolent protests today as well, and not just from Palestinians, as we've seen.
All right, well, the big question is, will this decision put Israel and the Palestinians on a path for peace? We might just have to wait for the dust to settle to know for sure. So thanks for the update, Brett.
Of course.
For Israel, the blame for the bloodshed seen along the Gaza border can be laid squarely on the shoulders of Hamas. The terror group has unambiguously stated that these March of Return rallies are intended for one thing and one thing only: to overrun the state of Israel and claim it for the Palestinians. Meanwhile, many international leaders have slammed Israel for its use of lethal force in containing these clashes. The IDF maintains that it has followed the strictest of protocols and accuses Hamas instead of turning its own civilians into human shields. Army officials say at least 24 of yesterday's casualties were actually Hamas members.
This is a position the White House has fully backed in the wake of yesterday's bloodshed, the worst single day of these protests since they began 6 weeks ago.
Well, we're aware of the reports of continued violence in Gaza today. The responsibility for these tragic deaths rests squarely with Hamas. Hamas is intentionally and cynically provoking this response, and as the Secretary of State said, Israel has the right to defend itself.
And now Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull backs this up too. For him, Hamas is purposely trying to provoke the IDF in order to intentionally draw fire for its own larger PR war. This position was made more concrete by the fact that Hamas pays protesters to martyr themselves at the front lines and is funded by the Iranian regime. Still, countless world leaders have accused Israel of recklessly using lethal force. Yesterday, 58 Palestinians were reported killed, among them 6 minors, including 1 baby.
Ben bu insanlık dramını, bu soykırımı hangi taraftan olursa olsun, ister Amerika ister İsrail, lanetliyorum. Ve buna sessiz kalanlara da kusura bakmayın, onları da lanetliyorum.
Prime Minister Netanyahu has slammed Erdogan's statement, calling him, quote, among Hamas's biggest supporters. There is no doubt that he well understands terrorism and slaughter. I suggest that he not preach morality to us, end quote. South Africa has actually just recalled its ambassador to Israel to protest the IDF's conduct. The international community has demanded at the very least an investigation into these dozens of deaths. The United States has blocked every attempt to date to do so.
Lethal force may only be used as a measure of last, not first, resort, and only when there is an immediate threat to life or serious injury. An attempt to approach or crossing or damaging the Green Line fence do not amount to a threat of to life or serious injury and are not sufficient grounds for the use of live ammunition.
Well, returning now to the studio with more on the rising tensions along the Gaza border is founder and executive director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies, Dr. Martin Sherman. Thank you very much for coming back.
Thank you.
All right, so my first question obviously is, Israel has now allegedly killed 58 Palestinians along the border and is getting a lot of flack for this use of lethal force. So, how do you see it?
Well, I think that Israel, of course, has both the right and the duty to preserve the borders of its sovereign territory. If you ask me, I think they've been very sparing with the use of force. I think that the fact that the protests are going on and on and on means that Israel has used too little force, because I believe that as soon as these demonstrations began to precipitate, Israel should have used overwhelming force and show the Palestinians that they cannot continue with this.
And you think that would have deterred more than, say, Hamas paying people to show up?
That depends on the amount of force you use. 20 years ago or 18 years ago, I wrote an article saying that we have to leave a traumatic scar on the collective Palestinian awareness, because if we don't, then they are going to have over a decade worth of a decade long of clashes. And I was wrong, because we've had much more than a decade. And I do not believe that there's going to be any consensual, because look what's happened since we left Gaza. When we left Gaza, the most ferocious or the most dangerous weapon that the Palestinians had was a Katyusha with a payload of 5 kilograms and a range of 5 kilometers. Now they have not only missiles with a warhead of 100 kilograms and a range of 100 kilometers. They have a maze of tunnels and naval forces and drones, etc., etc. Right. So unless you relate to the Palestinians as they relate to themselves, as a bitter, unrelenting enemy and not a prospective peace partner, you will never arrive at a policy that can ensure stability.
But let's go back to the idea of this PR war, because I know you've spoken at length in the past of Israel even putting in 1% of the budget towards PR. So just in the interest of positive PR, wouldn't it be in Israel's best interest to maybe scale back? Plus, if we take
what does scale back mean?
Take a note out of Rabin's book, and he says, break their bones but don't kill.
Well, I don't know actually what that means, because if only 100 of these Palestinian rioters broke through and took over a community nearby and butchered the residents and raped the women and razed the house, how would the country deal with something like that? But when you're talking about public diplomacy, I don't mean public diplomacy directed to a specific instance. You need an ongoing public diplomacy campaign that defines and changes the context and presents the Palestinians as they really are, a cruel, brutal society bent on the destruction of Israel.
All right, well, I want to kind of change the topic just a little bit. Now, there have been some murmurings about Egypt possibly getting into some sort of agreement with Israel to maybe annex Gaza and incorporate them into Egypt. Now, I know that Egypt had Gaza for 20 years, from 1948 to 67. So, do you see this as a likely possibility or even a solution?
Well, the short answer is no. I don't think it's practical, and I don't think it's desirable. And, whilst I have a lot of esteem for Sisi, and I think he's one of the most important politicians in the world today, not getting nearly enough recognition or assistance, I think that there's certainly no guarantee that he will continue. I think there's a very good chance that eventually Egypt will have to abandon Sinai. And I say this because I think the elephant in the room...
From ISIS, you mean?
Right. Not only that, because I think the elephant in the room is Ethiopia. Ethiopia is building a huge dam on the Blue Nile, which may dramatically reduce the supply of water to Egypt. And to deal with that, I don't think Egypt will have the resources or the resolve to impose law and order in Sinai. And, for Sisi to do that, he would have to do certain things that are extremely difficult for him to do. Like,
so
for
a lot
instance,
more work than he's really got in him at the moment, than Egypt can afford to get into.
Like, for instance, dismantling the Hamas.
Right.
Yeah.
So that would be, all right, well, thank you very much for coming in and talking with us, Martin.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, now we can't say this enough. Israelis are still celebrating Netta Barzilai's amazing win at the 2018 Eurovision Song Competition. Her victory means that next year's showdown will take place in Jerusalem, but because of this already, people are calling for a boycott of Eurovision 2019. Dublin Mayor Michael McDoncha says Ireland shouldn't even send a contestant.
It's only been a few days since Barzilai chicken danced her way into the hearts of audiences around the world and took first place for her hit song Toy. Barzilai's victory is actually also a big win over the BDS campaign, which boycotted hard against the Israeli singer from the start. But when the event comes to Jerusalem next year, Dublin's mayor says Ireland should join the cultural boycott and refuse to compete in order to show solidarity with the Palestinian people. The mayor says, quote, "I think the horrific ordeal of the Palestinian people needs to be highlighted," end quote. Doncha's words shouldn't come as much of a surprise, though. As the mayor of Dublin, he oversaw the passing of 2 resolutions endorsing the cultural boycott of Israel. In fact, just a few weeks ago, Doncha actually came to Israel, and Israeli authorities attempted to block him from entering the country because of his BDS track record. Due to an error in the spelling of his name on the travel documents, however, they were unsuccessful in blocking him. But for most, Barzilai's win, which is Israel's first victory in 20 years at Eurovision, is seen as its own kind of peace envoy to the world. Israelis are hopeful that Barzilai's message and the message of countless artists can trump hatred and succeed where politics and politicians often have not.
About 1 in 25 of us carry the disease in our genes, and 1 in every 3,000 babies born are diagnosed. I'm talking about cystic fibrosis. And CF is a progressive genetic multisystem disease, and as of today, there is no known cure. To make matters worse, in places like Israel, where the disease is relatively obscure, treatment can become a major hurdle. Well, one organization here in Israel is trying to help, and I'm pleased to welcome the Vice President of Resource Development at the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, Daniel Italiander. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
All right, my first question, give us a little bit more information about CF, because I know it's not widely known.
So cystic fibrosis is a chronic genetic disease that primarily affects the lungs. Due to a malfunction in the cells, the exchange between water and salt is not working properly, and a thick layer of phlegm is formed in the lungs. As a result of that, irreversible damage is done to the lung tissue, and ultimately shortening the life expectancy of the patient.
What are the treatments today for this?
Today we can fight the symptoms, but there's no cure to address actually the problem in the cell itself. So what we can do inhalations, we can do physical therapy and other treatments to get the phlegm out of the lungs. We cannot yet prevent the formation of the phlegm.
So what? I hate to ask this, but what is the mortality rate of this disease? I mean, how serious is this? Because I understand that, even with proper treatment, it's significantly reduced.
Yeah. So the life expectancy of cystic fibrosis patients today is around 40 years old, which is already a lot better than it was, let's say, a decade. We are making great progress, but there's still obviously a long way to go.
Now, I understand this is kind of a personal thing for you that you got, normally ask what inspired you to get into this, but I understand, what was it like when your son, and we're seeing him, on the screen a bit here, what was it like when he was diagnosed?
It was a devastating news, obviously, knowing, when you have a child, when you have certain expectations of what that life looks like, and that in one sentence by the diagnosis, that is completely wiped out, and you have to give that a place in your life.
And so now you're with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation here in Israel, and you're starting. There's a benefit concert soon. Correct?
That's right. So we are organizing a benefit concert with Yonina, who you may have heard of, the charming couple that stormed the internet, and they're giving a benefit concert for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, May 28th in Ra'anana. Tickets can be purchased from yoninamusic.com.
I'm very excited for this, and thank you so much for coming in. I wish you the best.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, now on a related topic, leave it to Israeli innovators to come up with a crazy science fiction approach to physical rehabilitation. Scientists have just created a one-of-a-kind robot that helps rehab patients rebuild their upper bodies by challenging them to the tried and true classic game of tic-tac-toe.
If going head-to-head with a robot in tic-tac-toe doesn't seem like your typical approach to the grueling trials of physical rehab, allow me to explain. The system uses a robotic arm to place paper cups on a 3x3 grid, forcing human players to match them with the same. Voila! Maybe it doesn't use X's and O's, but there you go, tic-tac-toe. This version of the game mimics the ordinary day-to-day functions that can be elusive to many rehab patients. For those with deeply damaged upper body muscles, something as mundane as grabbing a glass of water can suddenly become an intense physical challenge. Well, scientists at the Ben Gurion University of the Negev hope their invention can boost patients' recovery. So far, participants using the robotic method have greatly preferred this method over a system that uses light-up LEDs. Either the presence of a robot adversary or the integration of 3D mechanics encourages players to push their game or even go in for a rematch. And with physical rehab, practice is the true name of the game, so each robot can also be customized based on the patient's needs and speeds. But perhaps the biggest scientific feat of all is the fact that Israeli scientists actually found a way to make tic-tac-toe a lot less boring.
Unfortunately, this year was one of the worst in recent history for influenza. This flu season claimed the lives of at least 5 American children, in addition to as many as 500,000 people worldwide. But doctors hope that a new Israeli vaccine, the M001, could be the life-saving breakthrough that we've all been waiting for. Flu symptoms can, of course, range from a mild runny nose to a severe life-threatening condition. In countries like the United States, modern medicine has kept the epidemic somewhat contained with regular vaccinations. But for much of the world, where treatment isn't as readily available, the disease ravages the population like a pandemic. This is made worse by the fact that the influenza virus itself is constantly changing and adapting, which means that last year's vaccine may be useless next year. Well, Israeli medical experts hope that their new M001 cocktail could be the new and comprehensive solution. The drug was developed by Beyond Vax Pharmaceuticals, which is based in Nes Tziona, just south of Tel Aviv, and the United States National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases is already sponsoring clinical trials with the FDA. In fact, the drug now enters phase 2 clinical trials. The hope is that it will actually guard against multiple strains of influenza. Needless to say, millions are praying that this indeed will be the case. Ever wanted to float in space? Well, thanks to an incredible new virtual reality camera developed here in Israel, you almost can. The Views camera was used to capture stunning 3D images for One Strange Rock, a new documentary series from Oscar-nominated filmmaker Darren Aronofsky. And this is the first time ever that outer space has been filmed in 3D virtual reality. The few first episodes of One Strange Rock recently premiered on National Geographic, and the incredible images give viewers a comprehensive 360-degree view of outer space in an intimate portrait of life in the International Space Station. Nat Geo has released a clip from the series to YouTube where you can literally control the camera's point of view to feel the weightlessness of space for yourself. And the optics for this tech were, of course, developed by Israeli-based startup Human Eyes. Now, the camera, known as the Views, was customized for the high demands of space travel and space photography, but the Views isn't just for astronauts. You can buy one for yourself for about $800 and make your own 3D movies. But for NASA engineers who helped make this space shoot possible, the camera's usability was the big selling point. The Views is about as small as a sandwich, easy for anyone to use, and with images like these, clearly the pictures speak for themselves. All right, it looks like Oscar winner and actor Robert De Niro just made Tel Aviv an offer it can't refuse. The iconic leading man from Goodfellas, Raging Bull, and The Godfather Part 2 is bringing his boutique hotel chain to its very first Holy Land location. That means Tel Aviv's luxurious Rothschild Boulevard will soon be home to a Nobu hotel.
The two-time Oscar winner originally teamed up with Japanese celebrity chef Nobu Matsuhisa and Hollywood producer Meir Tepper back in 2013. Under the brand Nobu Hospitality, the restaurant-centric hotels have sprung up in 16 cities all over the world. The accommodations boast some of the trendiest styles, spaces, and foods out there. Canadian power couple Heather Reisman and Gary Schwartz, who lead Nobu's board of directors, are especially ecstatic that they'll finally be bringing all that posh to Tel Aviv. It only makes sense considering that Rothschild is known for its top-of-the-line restaurant and hotel scene. They started a scholarship program for lone soldiers serving in the IDF called the Heseg Foundation back in 2005, and they regularly donate millions to Jewish causes all over the world. As for the taxi driver himself, De Niro's no stranger to Israel at all. He famously sat down for a one-on-one meeting with Israeli President Shimon Peres in Jerusalem back in 2013. Maybe they were pitching around ideas for a fourth Meet of the Parents movie. Alright, maybe not, but hey, you never know. The Hebrew word of the day is brought to you by IDC Summer Ulpan, open to everyone.
And now for our Hebrew word of the day, whether it's for the mumps or the flu, vaccines, and more specifically the herd immunity that they provide, can literally be lifesavers. That's why today's word is chisun, meaning vaccination. While it's true that chisunim or immunizations contain bits of the virus that they're meant to prevent, countless studies have shown them to be the primary defense against nasty diseases, many of which, thanks to chisunim, are now even considered things of the past. Getting a chisun or vaccination prior to traveling to new places is also highly recommended, even required sometimes, so that you don't infect the locals and vice versa. Whatever the case, remember to consult with a pro on what chisunim are needed and for what. Better safe than sorry when it comes to the measles, is what I always say. And with that, let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be partly cloudy, but warm with a low of 65 or 18 degrees Celsius. Tomorrow you can expect clear and sunny skies with a rise in temperatures to a high of 84 or 29 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.59 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News and on Twitter at ILTV News. I'm Aaron Porras, and thanks for watching.